Demonology Warlocks have been dominating Mythic Plus this season, and if you are new or returning to the game, or you're just looking for what is probably the best ranged DPS spec so far, this video will teach you everything you need to know to start playing it, whether you've played it before or not. Before we start dealing with any kind of damage, you need to know what kind of resource you have to manage. This resource is Soul Shards, and you can have up to 5 Soul Shards at a time. Generating Soul Shards where you already have 5 Soul Shards is considered a waste, so that will be the first thing you will learn to manage. You have 2 ways of generating Soul Shards, either with Shadowbolt or Demonbolt. Generally, you would want to use Demonbolt to gain Soul Shards, as it generates 2 instead of 1. However, if you ever tried casting Demonbolt naturally, you probably noticed the quite lengthy cast, so it's actually more beneficial to cast 2 Shadow Bolts for the lower duration. So why would you even use Demonbolt? You might have noticed that we have a mechanic in our kit that's called Demonic Cores. You will get demonic cores from a variety of sources, and you can have up to 4 demonic core charges. Having a demonic core makes our Demonbolt cast instantly, which you would want to use as long as you are at 3 or fewer Soul Shards, since you do not want to overcap on resources. So those are your builders. Demonbolt if you have a demonic core stack, which is also signified by these 2 markers around your character, and if you don't have a demonic core stack, you will otherwise build Soul Shards with Shadowbolt.
But how do I spend them, Mr. Vats?
Demonology has only one way to spend Soul Shards, which is by using Hand of Gul'dan. Recently changed, it is now with a rigid cost of 3 Soul Shards, so every time you are at 5 Soul Shards, you have to spend them on Hand of Gul'dan. Casting it will not only deal a significant amount of damage, but will also summon 3 wild imps to attack your target. Now that's the bare basics of what you need to know just to build and spend. If you never played Demonology before, I would suggest just to try and play with these 3 spells to practice your resource management. Once you get that handle, we can move to our additional spells which have a cooldown. First cooldown you will try and use as soon as it's available is called Call Dreadstalkers, often referred to as dogs.
I like doggies, Mr. Vats.
Shut up, little Jimmy, I'm talking. Before midnight they cost 2 Soul Shards, but now we get access to a talent called Demonic Calling, which will make our dogs free and also instant cast. You would want to use them every time you have them available for a few reasons. One reason is that once they expire, they give us demonic core stacks for those instant demon bolts. And on top of that, you have a bunch of other interactions that will depend on the type of build you're running with. But regardless of the build, you will try to send dogs as much as you can as soon as they are available. The next cooldown you need to keep track of is Implosion. Also reworked in Midnight, it will now send up to 6 of your wild imps to the target, sacrificing them for damage, which you will use on packs of enemies every 15 seconds. If you have the To Hell and Back talent, every time you throw out 6 wild imps, you will also summon 3 empowered imps called Imp Gang Boss that will deal more damage and also deal AoE damage. So my advice is to try and use Implosion every 15 seconds as long as you have at least 6 wild imps. Your next cooldown is probably your most significant major cooldown. Summon Demonic Tyrant, which is also just referred to as Tyrant. Tyrant has been recently reworked to have its power fluctuate depending on how many of your wild imps you have out and whether you have Dreadstalkers active. You would want to use Tyrant as much as you can because it's a major power increase every 1 minute. Okay, so another thing that's new to Midnight is the introduction of Apex talents. They will be at the bottom of your spec tree, and you can invest 4 points into them to get the maximum effect. In the case of the Demonology Warlock, we have the Dominion of Argus Apex talents. Now what it basically does is every time you activate your Tyrant, you will open a portal for the next 15 seconds. And every time you cast 2 Hand of Gul'dan, you will summon a random demon that will serve you and attack your target for the next 14 seconds. In addition, while the portal is up, every time you cast Hand of Gul'dan, you will get refunded 1 Soul Shard. You should preferably have 5 Soul Shards when you summon a Tyrant, So you can basically cast Hand of Gul'dan, which will cost you 3, but then you will get refunded 1, so you will have 3 again, so you can cast Hand of Gul'dan again, and then you will have 1 Soul Shard. And assuming you have a Demonbolt proc with Demonic Core, you can cast it immediately, and then you will have 3 again, and then you can have Hand of Gul'dan again. And repeat it as many times as you possibly can within that Dominion of Argus window, so you can get the absolute maximum amount of demons from that window. Alright, so until now, everything I've mentioned is probably 90% of what you need to know to deal damage effectively as a Demonology Warlock. Still, on top of that, you also have other cooldowns and other talent interactions that will either affect your DPS or make your party's life easier. One of the cooldowns I'd like to mention is Grimoire Implored and Grimoire Fell Ravager. Currently, our one and only interrupt is through our main demon, Felguard, with the Extas ability. It would interrupt a cast, and if the target is stunnable, it would also stun them. This is not as good as you think, as sometimes you would want to interrupt a caster to gather it closer to all of the other mobs, so you can AoE bomb them. Unfortunately, because of this stun interaction, you cannot do that unless you get rid of your Felguard and summon a Fel Hunter instead. Before 12.0.5, you used to be able to utilize Grimoire Fell Ravager as a secondary interrupt. However, it will now purge a buff from an enemy instead. Our other choice, Grimoire Implored, will dispel a friendly party member. So depending on what kind of dungeon you are running, you would mostly want to run with the Implored instead of the Fell Ravager, since the range DPS is more consistent. And the only dungeon you would use a Fell Ravager in is Mycera Caverns. Otherwise, you'll use the Implored everywhere else. Another cooldown I want to talk about is Blight of Tongues. It is a 2-minute cooldown which will send a mist that will affect all enemies in an area and will increase the cast time of all kickable spells by 100% for the next 12 seconds. Alternatively, you can pick Blight of Weakness, which will do the same thing, but instead of slowing their cast speed, it will increase the time between their attacks by 100% and reduce their critical strike chance by 10% for the next 12 seconds. Usually, in most cases, you would want to pick Blight of Tongues. This will help your group with interrupts, as the cast will be much slower. Blight of Weakness is mostly used as a tank crutch, and Blight of Tongues is mostly a group crutch. It's not something that would increase your damage in any situation, whether you pick one or the other, but it's something you should know about to help your group. So the next part I want to talk about, which is usually what I talk about in these videos, which is the priority list for single target and AoE and the opener sequence. So this one is the priority list. It's not a cast sequence. You will look at it in terms of the most top thing is the most important one, and when you go down the list, it's less and less important. Of course, you would always want to follow logic when using it. So, for example, even though Tyrant is more important in terms of its significance, you would want to always cast Dreadstalkers before you cast your Tyrant. If you're not running dungeons and going for a single target fight, you would swap out Implosion for Power Siphon, and then it just replaces it in the same step. Power Siphon just sacrifices 2 of your wild imps and gives you 2 demonic core charges on a 30-second cooldown. As for the opening sequence, if you can do it, you would cast Demonbolt if you have like 4.5 seconds before the pull. If you cannot do it, or if you're stressed for time, you can opt for Shadow Bolt instead, but because Demonbolt grants 2 Soul Shards instead of 1, and also deals more damage than a Shadow Bolt, then preferably, if you can help it, cast a Demonbolt. Then immediately cast your Grimoire, either an Implored or Fell Ravager, doesn't really matter, and follow it up with a Shadow Bolt to get 1 more Soul Shard. Now preferably, you just want to get 5 Soul Shards before you're going into your Tyrant window. So depending on how many shards you had, and if you were able to cast Demonbolt or Shadow Bolt, it will depend on how many Shadow Bolts you will have to cast before you go into the next step, which is to use Cold Dreadstalkers into Tyrant, and then once your Tyrant window is active, you will focus on casting as many Hand of Gul'dans as possible. If it's a single target scenario, you will use Power Siphon after your second Hand of Gul'dan, and if it's an AoE scenario, you will use Implosion at 6 or more wild imps. After that, just follow the priority list I showed earlier. Okay, so next up I want to talk about the talent builds. Now, talent builds are a hot topic in my videos, and a lot of the time whenever I talk about a specific talent build, some bright individual in the comments will either make sure to notify that the build is now outdated, even though the video was for, I don't know, the previous season or the previous expansion even. So instead, I will now show you how to get all the builds you want, depending on what you're playing, in any dungeon or even raid.
But why can't you just give me the build, Mr. Fats?
Shut the fuck up and listen, little Jimmy. You need to learn how to do things when I'm not here. Now, if you go to warcraftlogs.com, and in the top left corner, there is the Dungeons and Raid button. For the sake of the guide being focused on a Mythic class build, you can click on Dungeons. You will have all these dungeons to pick from. You will pick the dungeon you are running. For this example's sake, I'll pick this one, and then you can see all the best runs for that specific dungeon. I will change the first filter from points to damage, and I will change the next filter instead of all classes to the class and spec I'm playing. So this time, it'll be a Demonology Warlock. Next up, I'll change the keystone level to whatever key I'm running. Builds will change depending on the key level. Then you will see the best top 100 talent choices for that specific key level and spec that dealt the most amount of damage. Now, of course, these guys are probably a lot better geared than you, and some of them are probably running with augmentation evokers or getting power infusion, but regardless, you can even see the breakdown of the percentages of which ones are picked and which ones are not. So you can either take an educated guess or an assumption based on what you see in the top 100 breakdown. Or you can just scroll down and look at the builds you're running with to see what kind of builds are doing the most amount of damage in that specific dungeon, in that specific key level. Don't worry, I will mention differences in gameplay between Soul Harvester and Diabolist shortly. First, I want to mention one of our talent choices, Banish. Usually didn't see a lot of usage in previous seasons, but in this season, there are a lot of use cases for Banish. So, for example, in the dungeon seat of the Triumvirate, you can banish the blobs on the first boss to either kill one blob first or just focus on the boss instead. And even before the first boss, you can banish the Void Queller. It's a minion Voidwalker of the Conjurer mob. It does AoE damage that you can negate if you banish the Voidwalker. The Voidwalker itself has 0 count and it despawns once the Conjurer dies, so it's very relevant this season. Also in the bird boss in Skyridge, if you banish the last bird before you kill the boss, you can reduce damage taken and focus on boss DPS. Alright, so Soul Harvester and Diabolist. Generally, there's not much of difference between those two in terms of actual damage numbers, but there will be cases in which one of them will deal more damage depending on the type of fight in a raid. For example, the second boss in Voidspire, we will run with Soul Harvester, because if we run with our melee Tyrant, it apparently can hit the boss, even though Hunter Pets can hit the boss, and also because Soul Harvester deals more damage in a pure single target environment. While in the other fights in the raid, we will most likely run with Diabolist. Of course, Mythic Plus dungeons are also currently mostly ran with Diabolist, and I want to give you the gist of how you would approach playing with each individual hero talent. If you're playing with Soul Harvester, you will need to know that the cast of the Demonic Tyrant will also grant you 3 Soul Shards. So every time you're running Soul Harvester and you're going to cast Tyrant, make sure you are at 2 or fewer Soul Shards. But if you're running with Diabolist, you will have to make sure you are already at 5 Soul Shards before you cast your Tyrant. Other than that, the gameplay rotation and priority don't change between Soul Harvester and Diabolist. You will still build and spend your Soul Shards and use your cooldowns as much as you can. For our secondary stats, the best way to know your ideal stat priority is to sim your character using raidbots.com. While there are general stat guidelines for Demonology, the value of each stat changes depending on your gear, trinket, and talents. Sim yourself regularly to see what's best at any given time. If you got any questions, drop them down in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos just like this one. And as always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.